Hi Year 10, Mr. Lloyd here with lesson 6 of India, our second to last lesson. So India and aid is the title of today's lesson. So first of all, what is aid? Aid is any help that is given from one country to another. That could be in the form of giving money, that could be in the form of giving medicine, sending over doctors to help, search and rescue teams, food, water. Do not just presume that aid is giving money. Sometimes people think that aid is just, there you go, there's some money. That doesn't always solve the situation. If there's been a disaster in a country and people are trapped, just giving money doesn't solve that situation straight away. So aid is giving one help in the form of anywhere from one country to another. Aid in India, one of the biggest givers of aid in India is the UK. It's always been one of the UK's top 5 receivers of British aid. So we can see here examples. In 2009, they received £408 million from the UK and were number 1. In 2012, they were number 1 again. In 2013, they dropped to 4th. And in 2014, they were 2nd. And over recent years, that has continued. They've always been one of the top 5 receivers of aid. Because they were a former British colony, we've supported them in their development and their growth. So moving on, India is rapidly growing. It's successful. There's loads of factories setting up there. They manufacture loads of things. So you might have the questions, why do they need aid if they're doing well for themselves and getting better? There's still a lot of inequality and problems in India. And we're going to look at 3 of the main reasons why they deserve aid now. Try and fit these into that top box if you're in your booklet, or please make notes on these. So reason number 1 is due to the inequality, i.e. things aren't equal, they're not equally spread out, money's not equally spread out, there is still huge poverty. That causes major issues. The majority of the country is still poor, and as we've used this fact a few times, 20% of people in India still live in extreme poverty. So therefore, areas like Dharavi, the largest slum in the world in Mumbai, still needs aid, still needs money, water, food, etc. Reason number 2 why India needs aid is as they're growing, they are growing very unsustainable. Remember, we said the word sustainable means to look after things for future generations, and India's not doing that. The environment is getting ruined, the land is getting polluted, the rivers are getting polluted, the air's getting polluted. They are growing very unsustainable. And as this diagram shows here, they are growing rapidly fast, but that means that they're coming to a cliff edge where they're not sustainable, and if they fall off that cliff, it could send the country backwards. So they need to try and grow a bit more sustainable to stop having a negative effect on people and the environment. Last but not least, aid builds good relationships. So the richer countries give aid to the poorer countries, and in return, then poorer countries will give the richer countries trade and build things for them, and factories and manufacturing. So an example would be the UK gives India aid, and we receive trade back from India as one of its trade partners. There are 4 types of aid that we're going to have a look at in this next section. If you're working in your India booklets, they're in 4 boxes. If not, just make notes on these 4 different types of aid. Firstly, short-term aid. As it says on the tin, this is to offer short-term quick solutions. So for example, an emergency would be short-term aid. If a country's had an emergency, an earthquake, volcano, or a flood or landslide that happened in India in 2017, they need quick help. There's no point saying, oh, what should we do? There's been a flood. Let's build a school. That wouldn't solve the situation initially. So for short-term aid, you're talking food, water, and medicine, and quick solutions. The other type of aid is long-term aid. And this is things like building schools, building wells for water. These are better in the longer term, but don't help initially at the beginning. So you've probably heard the saying before, give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. Give a person a fishing rod, you feed them for life. That's like these 2 things. If you just give people food and water, it's not helping in the long term. It's giving them the resources to do things for themselves, is long-term aid. Next type of aid is top-down aid. And as that says, you start from the top and you give the money down. So you give the money to the government of India or to charities like Aid India or any of these famous charities that you might have heard of, like CAFOD, the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development. And we give the money to those charities and the government, and they spend the money. Now, some people would argue that they don't know where the money should be spent and that the people know. Some people would argue that the government's the best people to decide where that money's spent. The last type of aid is bottom-up aid. And bottom-up aid is where you give the money to local people and the locals, and they spend the money. And again, the argument for that is that local people know how and where the money needs to be spent, but would they spend it right? So they're the 4 types of aid. Short-term aid, cope with emergencies. Long-term aid, things like development projects, building schools. Top-down aid, giving the money to the governments and charities and they spend the money. Bottom-up aid, giving the money to local areas and they spend the money. And obviously, aid has good impacts on India, and they're here. Now, I know if you're working in your booklet, there's not room for these, so please try and fit these somewhere else in your booklet or on a piece of paper. If you're just making your notes, you want to know how has India benefited from receiving aid from countries like the UK. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I'm going to focus on here is education and healthcare for women. What they've done is, in an area called Kerala in India, they brought in women getting free education, free healthcare. That has increased the life expectancy, that's reduced the birth rate, reduced the death rate. It's had a massive positive benefit by doing that for the women of Kerala. So that's one thing that they've been able to spend money on. We've talked about Dharavi slums. They've been improved due to aid and got better. Another benefit here is TNCs. Remember, transnational corporations, companies like Apple and Google are getting into India because they're going, oh, I see it getting better. So we'll go into that country. Also, FDI, foreign direct investment as well into the country. So that's happening with money being brought in. Quality of life has improved of people. And another big one is India still does have a problem with child labour and children being used instead of going to school in factories. That has reduced as the country has developed, and that is another massive benefit of aid. So that is our lesson done on aid in India. As always, make your notes. Please make sure you make your notes and upload those. Complete the quiz on Show My Homework using your notes to help you to get the best score possible. And then also, here is an extension exam question. Explain 2 types of aid an LIC or any country like India can receive. So just explain 2 types of aid. What is it? Explain it. What is it? Explain it. 4 marks. Okay, thank you very much. I will see you guys next week for our last lesson on India. Thank you so much. Mr. Lloyd, over and out.